All right, it's the top of the hour, and I'd like to go ahead and launch into our November 1st, 2021 Battleground City Council study session. Good evening, Council and staff. Tonight, we're going to go ahead and be talking about code enforcement overview. We're going to be presented with an overview of basically our code enforcement. So I will go ahead and turn it over to our city manager and our community development director.
Thank you, Mayor Cortez. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. As you're aware, we've been working on a code enforcement overhaul for quite some time now. This is a lot larger project than we anticipated, and timing with everything else going on, we hope to have this completed a little sooner, but we're getting there slowly but surely. So we'll kind of start, you'll see some repetitive stuff in here, just kind of refresh your memories based on what Sam has presented in the past, but this will mostly focus on the new program moving forward and the implementation. So code enforcement vision: city codes are designed to preserve and protect neighborhood character and the general well-being of citizens. Battleground strives for the highest level of voluntary compliance in all code enforcement actions through education or with minimal use of punitive authority. Further, the city strives to resolve all code enforcement action in a swift, fair, and equitable manner. So as part of the overhaul, there's a lot of code updates that needed to be done. A lot of these were cleaning up consistencies within the code and how we directed towards language. So some of the highlights of those code changes, and we're not going to go through those in detail here. If you have specific questions or would like to go through specific code sections, we can do that. We have them ready to go, but those will be in your November 15th packet. But just a few highlights of the main updates is just consistency, as it's been amended over the years related to code enforcement. Inconsistencies have developed between titles and how which title they refer to for enforcement. A clear process, so there's new code language that's more specific in terms of the timeframes, procedures, and then those can also be easily incorporated into the new software that we will be bringing online. Voluntary compliance, we haven't had this formalized in a process before, so it formalizes that. If things are not corrected within timeframes, there's fines that can be assessed and liens on the property if necessary. The city also has the option to seek an abatement order from Clark County Superior Court. The hearings examiner will be the body that hears the notices for violations or orders. And then there's a completely new nuisance chapter that replaces the existing subjective definitions. So that helps with clearly defining and lists some by example.
Aaron,
so, yeah.
Would you go back?
Yeah.
How will those fines be?
Oh, I'll show you. We'll go through the whole list. Of
no, if you'll go back, just one. If not corrected within that time frame, fines will be.
Which one are you looking at?
Fourth one down.
Where it says asked.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure that's the proper way to get those fines.
That's not. Yep, my bad. Thanks for putting that out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're going to show it to anyone else, but you might want to.
Yeah, we'll
change that.
I shouldn't abbreviate. Oh. Code sections that have been updated that you'll see in your packet are Title V, the business taxes, license, and regulations. And the majority of these, what they're doing, the updates that we have on the table now, are referring those back to Title 20. Some of them refer to their own code enforcement sections, but we're referring them all to Title 20 so that the enforcement is consistent across the board. So Title 6, again, just referencing back to Title 20. Title 8, health and safety, the code enforcement references, as well as a whole new nuisance chapter that's been created or updated. Title 12, the streets and sidewalks, updated violations and penalties. Title 15 for building and construction, referring to the Title 20. Title 16, same thing. 17, same thing. 18, environmental, same, referring everything to 20. And then Title 20 is a complete rewrite. So that's all, will all be done. And then we will be looking at Title 10 traffic come early 2022. So the meat and potatoes of the procedures for code violations. So we'll kind of go through intake and communication, the divisions of duties, the software updates, and so forth. So you've seen this before. Sam put this together, and we just showed a few months ago, kind of the overflow of the process. So you would have a complaint that's received. Code enforcement officer would do a field investigation. From there, determine if a violation exists, and if so, what type of action should be taken. So it would either be issuing a warning, entering into a voluntary compliance agreement, a corrective notice, or a ticket. The code enforcement officer then coordinate with the department staff to figure out to make sure that the corrective action being asked is correct and per the code, and then set a scope and time frame for coming into compliance, do periodic field checks, and then assess civil penalties if necessary, and coordinate with legal if needed to go farther. And then we'll have the cost recovery through legal means or correction. So,
Erin,
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but on that flow chart, I don't see anywhere where it says, so it says complaint received, but I don't see anywhere where it says we followed up with the person that made the complaint.
Yeah, so that'll be part of the receiving the complaints process.
Okay.
So yeah, well, actually that's the next slide.
Right.
So receiving and doing the intake of a complaint, and the citizen can submit a code compliance complaint via the website portal, via telephone, or in person at City Hall. If they submit through the portal, it would provide an automated response back to the applicant that we received their complaint and that we will be in touch with them within 48 hours. Then the code compliance officer reviews that and either makes follow-up phone calls with the complainant or conducts site visits to determine if a violation exists. We don't have the code enforcement module for InterGov built yet, but the building one is online. So I am going to show you kind of what that looks like, because that will give you an idea of what the citizens will see and what they'll be looking at. So this is the building section, and actually I'll show you what the main screen looks like. So you can apply, you can log in and have your own registration. You can map your complaint and so forth. Like I said, this is for building and planning, but we'll have this built out for code enforcement. So any member of the public can search any property and see if there's any permits on it, if there's any code violations and so forth. So just to kind of show you what it will look like if you do submit a code violation. If a code case is created, the applicant or the complainant can come on here and they'll be able to see at what point the project is in the workflow. So in our software system on the inside, we have a workflow that we go through for staff. So on the building side, for example, it's intake of the application, it's confirmation that they've paid their fees, it's issuance of the permit, and then every inspection down the line. So for code enforcement, there'll be a similar workflow that's built into that, the intake process, if there is a violation, the follow-up inspections, and all of those things. So those will be listed here under workflow. It'll have this progress button if there's any outstanding civil infractions and so forth, and then all the information on location and so forth. So anybody from the public will be able to look this up and they can track where that complaint is. So I'll stop sharing that and go back to the PowerPoint here. So once a violation, once we have determined that there is a violation, there's multiple paths that we can take. One is a warning. So verbally or in writing, when a field inspection reveals a violation, verbal warnings need to be logged into the system and followed up in writing within 5 days. The warning needs to inform the violator and allow the person an opportunity to come into compliance. And the site should be re-inspected within 14 days. The warning should provide a reasonable time frame for abatement of the violation, but not to exceed the 30-day timeline. So Sam has, along with all the code updates, has created all of the forms, and these will also be built into the software so that the code enforcement officers can fill this out and print them in the field. Hopefully we get to that point. The next option is a voluntary compliance agreement. So voluntary compliance agreements can be entered into at any time after issuance of a verbal or written warning, a notice of order or stop work order, basically we could choose to go down this path anytime prior to an appeal. Upon entering, the violator admits to the condition and waives the right to an appeal. So that's one big key point to these voluntary compliance agreements. By entering into this, they are basically admitting fault, which then if it does not get fixed when we have to go through that appeal process or through the court process, it makes it a lot easier because they've already admitted to the violation. The agreement shall incorporate the shortest reasonable time period for compliance. And if it's not met, then we'll assess civil penalties. The next, oops, did I go backwards? I did. So the next option is notice of order. This can be issued after the violation is found or within 10 days of a voluntary agreement not being met. These notice of orders do include civil penalties. So depending on the citation, it could be a daily penalty. It could be just a sum, depending on what the violation is. The city can add to, revoke, or in whole or in part, or otherwise modify any order within the written supplemental order. And if compliance is not reached, the city may issue a stop work order, suspend, revoke, deny permits, or abate property. Two other options for violations are a stop work order. We can issue a stop work order to any person responsible for a code violation. It does not need a notice of order first. This can be done at any time. A stop work order indicates a code violation has or is occurring and the work or activity causing it needs to stop. The stop work order can be appealed within the 14 days and it can be enforced by PD. The city may assess civil penalties starting on the first day that the stop work order is violated and shall cease on the day the work stops. This can also be pursued for criminal penalties should they not cease to stop work. The other issue is abatement. So we have emergency abatement, which is immediate threat to the public health, safety, or welfare, or the environment. We can abate those conditions without notice. We have judicial abatement. So the city may seek abatement order from Clark County. See, there's another typo in there. From Clark County Superior Court to abate a condition which continues to be a violation. We can recover costs of abatement. And once we start doing this, we'll set up an abatement fund that will to create from the penalties we receive to offset costs of future abatement. So for example, if we have to abate a piece of property, we put a lien on that, but it's going to be years before we're going to recoup those costs. So that is something to keep in mind. And then for the civil penalties, in addition to the judicial and administrative remedy, we can assess the civil penalties, and this mostly comes on that notice of order. They can be identified in the notice of order or the stop work order. And we can also collect cost recovery fees, and we can use a collection agency in order to collect the civil penalties if we're having a hard time with that. So we have the violation schedule built into Title 20. For your first violation, it's $250. A second separate violation within 3-year period, maybe the same type of nuisance or even a different one, is $500. And so far down the line, so each subsequent separate violation goes up to $1,000 or $10,000. So to go along and help with this process and with the warnings and notice of orders and violations, we'll be doing a lot of technology upgrades. We're updating our code enforcement software right now. So we have the code enforcement module in place already, but with all these new process changes, we'll be updating that workflow so that it matches what the code process is. So we're working on that. We'll be introducing the citizen portal. So that's what I just showed you that's online. We'll be creating the code enforcement section of that. It'll look a little bit different, but same sort of concept. For messaging, all the forms of messaging to citizens would be standardized and consistent. Web page will reflect the new codes, answer common questions, provide portal links for complaints and so forth. And again, tracking the centralized software will help improve our tracking and reporting for code enforcement. We're talking about adding one number for citizens that can file a complaint instead of multiple staff numbers or departments. It would be one code compliance phone number. And then responses on the portal and asking citizens if they'd like further updates on resolutions once they occur. So looking back towards the whole overflow of the workflow, code compliance officers will now start to act as project managers and then consult with the associated departments to inform them of the issues and request assistance. So they will basically take in the violation, determine if there is a violation, then they'll work with each of these departments, depending on what type of violation it is, for what the code requirements are and what needs to be met. And we will dive into this a little bit deeper a little bit later in the presentation. So one thing, the other piece of this is parking enforcement. So one thing that will be a big shift is parking enforcement will be shifting to the PD. So anything that is a parking violation or abandoned vehicle that lives within the right of way will be handled by the police department. And then any parking violations that are on private property will still remain with code enforcement. So identifying parking violations, again, the citizens can submit complaints via phone, website, the portal, email, or the 911 or 311 system. The battleground police officers will start patrolling their beats for parking enforcement issues and abandoned vehicles. They'll be placing warnings and or tickets on the vehicles, and the follow-up will occur per the timelines given. So this would be if they've issued a warning and they haven't followed up, they would go back and issue tickets. And if those have, and correction still hasn't been made, then they will coordinate for the towing of the vehicle. One of the duties of the new administrative lieutenant will be to manage this program and implement a tracking system. So one of the struggles, one of the reasons why PD has struggled with the parking enforcement in the past is because as they change shifts, there's no way if they put a warning notice on, we didn't have a tracking system that they could come back within 72 hours and issue a citation. So they go away for 4 days and then they have to start that process over. So the new admin lieutenant will be creating a reporting, and I think they've already kind of started that. So then each sergeant, as they come on, will see all the open violations and parking enforcement and can follow up on those as needed. If the violation is not corrected, the city will tow the vehicles. So we currently have a contract with Chappelle's Towing for standard vehicles, and we've umbrellaed under the county for the larger RVs and boats. The larger vehicles that include personal belongings, those need to be stored for up to 30 days prior to impound or destruction. And so we can pull these, have them towed to the public works yard and let them sit there for 30 days and wait out that period before we send them in and have them destroyed. Also, one thought is if we have one or two, it's a little bit more cost effective to do them all at once instead of one-off. So we actually currently have one sitting there now, and we'll probably every 2 to 3 months, depending on what we've got sitting there, do a destruction. So parking citations and fines. Fines will be issued with the tickets and to be paid to the Battleground Municipal Court or via mail. Battleground Municipal Court will conduct a follow-up for these unpaid fines. Registered owner has 15 days to either pay in full or request a payment plan or hearing. If no response is received, then the collection process would start within 30 days after the infraction was issued. So parking citations, again, within the right-of-way will be appealed to the Battleground Municipal Court. So staffing and department needs, what's the impact of all of these changes and the needs for staffing in comparable jurisdictions? So the process impacts to the department, community development engineering. This will kind of go down through each department, but code enforcement officers will start acting, as I stated before, as the project managers for all types of code violation, and the staff will then provide the assistance and support. So currently the way the process works is that staff manages their own code cases. So for example, the planning or zoning issue comes in, say there's a wetland issue or a sign issue or a structure built without a permit. Those come in, Brent, the code enforcement officer, may receive those, and then he's going to pass those along to the department or the person that can help solve the violation. And where we're falling apart right now is that those people are also working to do their own jobs and do their own review, their state mandated timelines. And so when they're up against having to do reviews for building or planning permits that have timelines, the first thing to drop off is the code enforcement. So by shifting everything back to the code enforcement officers, this will help manage those timelines and keep things moving forward with just asking for assistance from the department staff. So this graphic just kind of shows, what types of issues would happen. It would filter through the code enforcement, and then they will prepare cases and for the voluntary compliance or the notice of orders and so forth, and then just go back and forth with the department staff for assistance as needed. Impacts to the police department. This will increase patrol for parking violations and abandoned vehicles, increase follow-up for parking violations and tickets. And then again, the new admin lieutenant to manage those timelines in the program. On the legal department side, this will increase consultation throughout code enforcement process. This would include reviewing and approving the voluntary compliance agreements, notice of orders, etc. And this is really crucial to have done prior to it going to the hearing to make sure it's set up properly. They would be representing the city with the hearings examiner and the court process. And the new paralegal is slated to assist with this increased workload. On the court side, they would have increased dockets due to increased amount of parking tickets and criminal citations due to code enforcement action, and then increased customer walk-ins for payments of parking citations. And then we'll have increased time for the hearings examiner. He's currently only hearing land use decisions. So anything appealed from the code enforcement side will now go to the hearings examiner. So as you guys are aware, let's see, back in 2011, the city had 2 code enforcement officers at that time. We laid one off when we went into the recession, and we've never actually brought them back. As you're aware, we've added a request for an FTE in the 2022 budget. So I just kind of wanted to show some comparable jurisdictions and what they have for staffing on the code enforcement side. This includes code enforcement, parking enforcement, and animal control. They all do it a little bit different. But you can see that the jurisdictions within our population base all have on average about 2.5 probably bodies to do this. So once with only one, you get down into that 14,000, 15,000 in population. So I don't think we're that far off by requesting another officer to help manage the situation, depending on just based on our population number and comparables. And then the implementation timeline. So again, first round of code amendments will be completed by the end of the year. You'll get those in your packet on the November 15th meeting and hopefully have those adopted before the end of the year. The transition of parking enforcement to the PD will be by the end of this year. Software upgrades and the online portal. We're kind of dependent on the vendors for this, and they're very busy. We are working on the internal software, and we're pushing really hard for the portal, but we are kind of dependent on them. So we'll see. I'm hoping we can get this in the first half of next year, but we will see. And then the hiring of a new officer, we would probably wait till mid-2022 to ensure the process is set up and things are running efficiently, and then bring another body on board. So that concludes the show. And actually, I'll see if Sam has anything to add to that. Otherwise, we can turn it over for questions.
Nothing for me.
Okay.
All right, council, any questions for Aaron?
Aaron, can we go look at the fee assessment page again?
This one?
Yep. Are those placeholder numbers or are those actuals?
Those are, well, so this is built into the Title 20 that you guys will be looking at and adopting. So they can be adjusted. Okay, so
I'm curious. So when we talked about, I think it was 3 or 4 slides forward from there, there was something about public works with raised sidewalk panels. Remember which one that one was? There you go.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be issuing fines to residents if they had raised sidewalk panels.
Potentially. I mean, we have that option. And again, we can go down the voluntary compliance options with them and the warnings. And if they can get them fixed within a certain amount of time, then we wouldn't issue that. But so that kind of leaves a little bit of discretion for things like that.
So throughout the last 20 years of growth, even back in, I think 93, 94, when I was framing houses south of City Hall there, the city's changed the different kinds of trees that they allow in the right-of-way strips. And periodically we allow developers to put trees that they feel are best fit for there, and then they're done. And then we find out that those root balls have a major impact on sidewalks. So on the code enforcement side of that, that's where I do have a challenge assessing large fines to people that didn't have a say of what kind of trees they are allowed to, that were put there. And then we also have in our code that if a tree does come down, that they are required to replace that with a like tree. So are we going to be looking at adjusting that?
Yeah, so I mean, this slide is basically to kind of give examples of what falls within each department. It's not to say that we're going to go start fining people for issues such as that. I mean, that's why we've built discretion into this. And in my mind, it's if we need to have a violation for some reason that there's a sidewalk issue, but if there's a problem that was not created by them, we've worked with them in the past and will continue to do so.
Okay. And then the last question I have for you is towards the end there, you had your sheet that showed the varying use of departments and their time. Did you do an analysis to kind of come up with a ballpark figure right there?
This
For example, the hearing examiner time, do you have a rough estimate number of how much time they're going to be increased by?
At this point, I really don't. This is all going to be a new process and we haven't appealed to the hearings examiner before. So I'm thinking, my guess is the first year, it's not going to be a big, huge impact, but hopefully it will continue to increase over time as we get this process down. But I don't have a ballpark in mind unless Sam, you looked at that at all.
No, I think that's the way I'm thinking. There might be a few cases that go to the hearing examiner. It's really going to depend on the amount of code enforcement that's initiated from the city and the amount that a citizen would disagree with the city and want to appeal that to the hearing examiner. My thought is most of these cases would work themselves out and not have to go to a hearing examiner. Because an appeal is for a situation where a citizen just fundamentally disagrees with the order or, and in code enforcement, typically it's pretty obvious. Either something is outside of code and those are going to be cases that could be resolved outside of a hearing examiner.
I'll stop this I can pull it back up at any time if anybody else wants to look at some of the slides.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to chime in? Feel free to chime in.
I just want
Go
to
ahead.
say, Aaron, and everyone else that worked on this, great job. It looks very well put together, and I appreciate all the work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Johnson? Feel free to
Following
jump
up
in.
with Mr. Munson, on hearing examiner, is it loser pays?
Yes, we would be cost recovery for the hearings examiner.
So we lose, we cover everybody's expenses. My neighbor loses, he covers our expenses as well.
I believe, Sam, I haven't looked through completely at Title 20. Is that the way it's written for cost recovery on the hearings examiner?
Yeah, from what I can remember, they have to pay their $250 appeal fee, I think. In terms of I don't have that off the top of my head of whether we would have to pay, for example, attorney fees or something like that. I'd have to dig into the details on that.
I mean, that only seems fair. I mean, if we lose, then it only seems fair. They wouldn't have ever come to see us and wouldn't have incurred those costs otherwise. And if we win in this case, that too only seems fair. That we wouldn't be there without the problem. So if you look in and see that.
Yep,
and then
sure, that's definitely
with the cops, Aaron, is that boats and trailers as well? Camping trailers, that kind of stuff on the street?
yeah. Any violation in the right of way.
It is their business.
Yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned the difference between, a cop comes to work today and goes off work today and we don't see him or her again until Friday. The highway patrol, the troopers, whatever they're called, they put orange stickers on the window.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that should tell every cop that, cop A has stickered this car and is responsible for it. Is that what we're planning on doing, or are we just writing plate numbers and addresses?
So it'll be within their software now. They'll put a warning or a citation on the car itself, and then they'll open a case for that. So then when the next shift comes in, that sergeant can see what's open and if it's up against the timeline that it needs to be evaluated or not, because they have the 72 hours. So they'll be able to pick and to look at all the open ones and see which ones they need to go out and do site visits on.
Okay. And then in Vancouver, when they do stop work orders, they put it up next to the number of the house and shoot a picture. And it goes into the file. Therefore, no one can come back, take it down and say, no, never saw it. Well, we got a picture where we put it up. Is that what we do?
Yeah, very
So
similar.
we're filed that way.
Yep.
And then, so is the, back to the cops. So the admin lieutenant, this will be his or her responsibility the whole way through the line. The street cop does their business. The sergeant, of course, is the supervisor. And the admin person will take it all the way through to the end.
Yeah, they will be responsible for making sure that the program stays on track, that the officers are continuing to follow up on citations. They'll do the tracking for the permitting and so forth. And Chief, I'll let you chime in too if you have anything additional to say.
Yeah, but well, thanks, Mr. Johnson. Great minds think alike. We've already thought about those orange stickers that are unremovable. It seems like that the state puts on the vehicle on the side of the road. That is the strategy. Part of the job of the new admin lieutenant is to conceive of all of this stuff and to make it workable, trackable, presentable, enforceable by law and everything else. So that's that person's job. As you mentioned, the street cop will do the work on the street. Supervisor will make sure on a daily basis the issues we have are timelines, right? So within these 72-hour timelines, or I would say outside of the 72-hour timelines, is when we lose people, is when we lose the momentum. So we are even now building in our report writing system a way that the sergeants at any given time can see what's open and what is needing follow-up, whether it was the officer working that day when it comes time to go do some abatement or not. So that kind of strategy is what is in the works, and what I expect from that new lieutenant is conceive of those things that we haven't yet conceived of to make this work. So we want to have them ultimately at the end of the day. All of this is designed to help with essentially the beautification, right? So we don't have these abandoned eyesores in neighborhoods and things like that, but to build in this more robust parking enforcement, and by having the PD focus on that rather than this big giant monster of all code enforcement of all kinds of things. As discussing with the department heads and city manager, that's how we conceived of this, of it coming to the PD. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get our arms around that. I'm confident we will.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Ms. Erdman.
All right, anybody else?
I got a question, Adrian.
Yeah, go ahead and jump in.
So we saw the other cities and how many code enforcement officers they have or compliance officers. Can you, I know that the admin lieutenant, all their time is not going to be spent for this. But I would like to see in relation to those cities, how many attorneys and paralegals they have, how many lieutenants they have, to compare that to what we're adding here, because we're adding quite a bit. When you figure that code enforcement, we're adding another paralegal, we're adding another lieutenant, and we're adding a code enforcement officer. So I would like to see where those other cities stack up with that too, because it, to me, and we asked this, gosh, probably 4 years ago, to show us that what we could do with the one that we have, right? With the code enforcement officer that we have, and see what that looks like. Because for me, every time we add a level of employment, and once again, I'm not upset at our legal department, but our legal department started with 1 4 years ago. It was 2 this last year. And now we're going to 3. So in 4 years worth of time, we've tripled our legal department because of all the issues that are going on. So where are we going to be next year? You know, if it doesn't, we don't have as many issues, are we laying people off, or do we have more issues and we're hiring more? So I would like to kind of see where those other cities are too with that, because that's a little bit of a concern to me. I know, you know, the lieutenant position we didn't fill. So, and I know that they will take on more roles than just this. This is probably a very small percentage of their time. But what does that look like? Because the overall cost is not just a code enforcement officer then. So what is the total overall cost for this program with the software, with the paralegals time? I know we can't figure in hearings examiners. I do think that, and I hope it's in there, that there is a cost recovery system for that, because if I can challenge the city and it's not going to cost me anything but my attorney, I'd do it all day long, especially if you're in that $10,000, you know, ballpark where you're getting fined $10,000. You know, somebody's got a buddy that's an attorney, they come take a free shot at the city, and you know, so the cost recovery would be interesting too. So thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Anybody else want to chime in? Okay, seeing none. Aaron, thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you, Sam. Council, we will go ahead and adjourn. We've got about 24 minutes until our regular council meeting at 7 o'clock. So we'll adjourn, and I'll see everybody back here at 7 o'clock.